A Malaysian working in Singapore recently left a comment on one of our videos, and they weren't shy about calling out what they felt was inaccurate. They questioned our take on taxes, property rental yields, and the standard of education between Singapore and Malaysia. And honestly, they raised some valid points. But do they tell the full story? Today, we're diving deeper into the real numbers and realities behind the Malaysia-Singapore comparison. Because while it's easy to paint one country as better than the other, the truth is far more complex. We'll unpack taxes, personal and corporate, compare property markets with actual data, and look at education standards through global performance indicators. If you're someone living in either country, thinking of working across the border, or just curious about how these two nations really stack up, this episode will give you the full picture, based on facts, not just opinions. Stick around, because you might just change the way you see both countries. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. We go beyond headlines to give you the truth behind the trends shaping Southeast Asia and the world. Tax comparison, Malaysia versus Singapore. Let's start with one of the most debated topics, taxes. At first glance, you might think Malaysia has lower taxes than Singapore, especially since it's often seen as a more affordable country to live in. But when you look closely at how the tax systems actually work, the picture becomes more nuanced. In Malaysia, personal income tax is progressive, ranging from 0% to around 30% for the highest earners. If you're making above RM250,000 a year, you could be paying between 24% and 30% depending on your income bracket. For middle income earners, that rate can hover around 8 to 14%, which may not sound too bad until you realize the deductions and exemptions are far more limited than in Singapore. Now let's talk about Singapore. The top marginal income tax rate here is 22%, and that only applies to those earning above SGD 1 million. Most working professionals fall in the 7 to 15% range. But here's what makes a big difference. Singapore offers a wide range of tax reliefs for things like family support, retirement savings, life insurance, and education. That means your effective tax rate, the actual percentage you pay after all deductions, is often significantly lower than it appears on paper. So is Malaysia cheaper in terms of taxes? Not necessarily. In fact, many high-earning Malaysians working in Singapore are paying less tax here than they would back home, especially if they know how to optimize their reliefs and contributions. We also can't ignore corporate tax. Malaysia has a flat corporate tax rate of 24%, while Singapore's is 17%. For businesses and investors, that's a huge difference. Add to that Singapore's various tax incentives for startups, tech companies, and global firms, and it becomes clearer why so many entrepreneurs and multinationals choose to incorporate in Singapore instead of Malaysia. Then there's GST, or Goods and Services Tax. Malaysia reinstated its Sales and Service Tax, SST system at 6%, while Singapore's GST was raised to 9% in 2024. On the surface, Malaysia appears cheaper here, but GST is just one piece of the cost of living puzzle, which we'll touch on later in the video. So when it comes to the tax conversation, it's not about which country looks cheaper at first glance. It's about effective tax rates, what you get in return, and how your financial planning lines up with the system. And for many, Singapore still offers more predictability, better incentives, and lower effective tax burdens, especially for skilled professionals and business owners. Rental yield and property market reality. Now let's talk about real estate, specifically rental yield. In the comment we received, the viewer pointed out that rental yields are higher and more stable in Singapore, and that Malaysia has an oversupply problem. And on this point, they're absolutely right. First, let's define what rental yield actually means. It's the annual rental income you earn from a property expressed as a percentage of the property's value. So if you buy a condo for $1 million and earn $40,000 in rent annually, that's a 4% rental yield. In Singapore, average gross rental yields for residential properties typically range between 3% and 4.5%, depending on location and property type. While that may not seem huge, it's the stability that makes it attractive. Singapore has consistently high demand for rental properties, especially in central regions, due to its strong expat population, limited land supply, and world-class infrastructure. And despite rising property prices, vacancy rates remain relatively low. Now compare that with Malaysia. Rental yields in Malaysia are more volatile and generally lower, between 2% and 3% in many areas. While property prices are lower in absolute terms, oversupply is a serious issue, especially in cities like Kuala Lumpur and Johor Bahru. According to national property reports, Malaysia has tens of thousands of unsold residential units, and many completed condos sit vacant for months. That creates pressure on landlords to lower rents, which in turn lowers the yield. What caused this oversupply? Part of it is speculative development. Too many luxury condos were built for anticipated demand that didn't fully materialize. Another part is affordability. Many locals struggle with income levels that don't match property prices, so even though units are technically available, demand is weak. The result? Higher vacancy rates and slower capital appreciation. There's also the issue of currency risk. For foreign investors, returns in Malaysia can be further eroded by the depreciation of the Malaysian ringgit. On the other hand, Singapore's strong and stable currency makes it a more secure investment destination. So if you're looking at property purely from a yield and investment security standpoint, Singapore offers more consistency, even if the entry cost is higher. In Malaysia, lower property prices may attract some investors, but the real challenge is turning those properties into reliable, income-generating assets. Again, the viewer made a good point. Malaysia's rental market is facing challenges that Singapore has largely avoided. And that's not about bias, it's about market fundamentals. Education standards Malaysia vs. Singapore. Let's now turn to something that impacts families directly, the quality of education. The viewer mentioned that Malaysia's education standard is generally lower than Singapore's, and that's a tough but fair assessment when we look at global data and lived experiences. Singapore has built a reputation as one of the top-performing education systems in the world. This isn't just national pride, it's backed by international benchmarks. In the latest PISA rankings, which measure 15-year-olds' abilities in reading, mathematics, and science, Singapore consistently places among the top 3 globally. That's ahead of countries like the US, UK, Australia, and yes, Malaysia. The Singaporean education model is rigorous, competitive, and deeply rooted in STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Schools are well funded, teachers undergo intensive training, and student performance is closely tracked. There's also a strong emphasis on bilingual education, typically English and mother tongue, and a culture that values academic excellence from an early age. In contrast, Malaysia's public education system has faced structural challenges over the years. From inconsistent curriculum changes and underfunded rural schools to political interference and language policy shifts, many of these issues have held back progress. Urban schools and private institutions in Malaysia do perform better, but they serve only a segment of the population. To give some perspective, while Singapore spends less per student than some Western nations, the way it allocates those resources is efficient and results-driven. Malaysia, despite spending billions annually on education, still sees uneven outcomes. And this affects not just test scores, but also how well students are prepared for a competitive global job market. Now, it's worth mentioning that Malaysia does have high-quality international and private schools, especially in cities like Kuala Lumpur and Penang. These cater to expats and upper-middle-class families, offering curricula like IB, British A-levels, and the American system. But again, access to these institutions is limited by affordability and geography. And let's not forget about higher education. Singapore's universities, like the National University of Singapore, NUS, and Nanyang Technological University, NTU, are ranked among the best in Asia and the world. Graduates from these institutions are heavily recruited both regionally and internationally. Malaysia's top universities, like University Malaya, are improving in rankings, but the gap in global recognition is still significant. So yes, the education gap is real. And if you're a parent choosing between the two systems, you have to consider not just tuition costs and convenience, but also the long-term value of the education your child is receiving. Healthcare, quality versus access. When it comes to healthcare, both countries shine, but in very different ways. Singapore's healthcare system is widely recognized as one of the most efficient and advanced in the world. It ranks in the global top 10 for healthcare outcomes despite spending far less per capita than countries like the US or Japan. Hospitals are high-tech, waiting times are short in public institutions, and doctors are often trained internationally. The country's 3M system, MediSave, MediShield Life, and MediFund, offers a structured safety net for citizens and permanent residents. But here's the catch. If you're a foreigner without residency, healthcare in Singapore can be expensive. A short hospital stay or surgery can easily cost thousands of dollars. That's why most expats in Singapore take out private health insurance as a necessity, not a luxury. Now let's look at Malaysia. Malaysia's healthcare system doesn't rank as high globally, but it's surprisingly strong, especially for what it costs. Private hospitals in Kuala Lumpur, Penang, and Johor Bahru offer excellent care at a fraction of Singapore's prices. Many Malaysian doctors are UK or US trained, and the country has developed a solid reputation for medical tourism, particularly in dental care, cosmetic surgery, and chronic illness treatment. And here's what surprises many. For those without insurance, Malaysia can be more accessible. A specialist consultation might cost RM 80 to 150, while the same visit in Singapore could set you back SGD 100 to 200 or more. Of course, public hospitals in Malaysia do face challenges, longer waiting times, staff shortages in rural areas, and occasional quality gaps. But for many middle-class families and retirees, Malaysia offers an affordable, decent standard of care that punches above its economic weight. So who wins? If you're looking for world-class speed and cutting-edge facilities, Singapore leads. But if you're after affordable, quality healthcare without breaking the bank, Malaysia is incredibly attractive, especially for expats, retirees, or digital nomads. Cost of living. Now let's talk about everyday life, because it's not just about where you earn more, but how far your money actually goes. Singapore is consistently ranked as one of the most expensive cities in the world. Rent alone is a major cost driver. A one-bedroom apartment in the city center can easily cost SGD 3,000 or more per month. Even in the heartlands, it's rare to find anything below SGD 2,000. Add on food, transportation, childcare, and healthcare, and the monthly bills stack up quickly. Malaysia, by contrast, offers a much more affordable lifestyle. In cities like Kuala Lumpur or Penang, you can rent a spacious two-bedroom condo for RM 2,000 to 3,000. That's about SGD 600 to 900. Eating out is significantly cheaper, with a full local meal at a hawker stall costing just RM 8 to 12. Even ride-hailing services like Grab are much more wallet-friendly. But here's the nuance. Salaries in Malaysia are generally lower. So if you earn in Malaysian ringgit, your purchasing power is naturally limited. The real advantage kicks in if you're earning in Singapore dollars or US dollars and living in Malaysia. That's when the difference becomes clear. This is exactly why many Malaysians working in Singapore live in Johor Bahru, earning in SGD while spending in RM. It's a smart financial move, but not without trade-offs. Daily border crossings, long commutes, and the unpredictability of immigration lines can wear you down over time. Another factor to consider is infrastructure. Singapore is clean, efficient, safe, and incredibly well organized. You're paying a premium, but it delivers. Malaysia, while progressing fast, still faces inconsistencies in public services, infrastructure, and safety, especially outside major urban centers. The bottom line? Malaysia wins on affordability, no question. But Singapore offers predictability, prestige, and peace of mind. It all comes down to what you value more: cost savings, convenience, or career opportunity. No one size fits all. At the end of the day, Singapore and Malaysia each have their pros and cons. Singapore offers world-class systems, but at a higher cost. Malaysia provides a more affordable lifestyle, but with trade-offs in consistency and infrastructure. It really comes down to what you value more: stability and structure, or flexibility and affordability. We appreciate the comment that sparked this discussion. It pushed us to go deeper. Now, we want to hear from you. Are you living in one and working in the other? What's your experience been like? Drop a comment below. If this video helped you, subscribe for more global insights and real-world comparisons, and share it with someone making this decision. It might just help. Thanks for watching. See you